The 19th century is usually described as an age of limits. Steam engines were powerful but crude. Gas lighting was bright but dangerous. Electricity, according to textbooks, was little more than a laboratory curiosity until the very end of the century. A few sparks, some experiments, and then suddenly Edison, power stations, and modern electrification. But that clean narrative begins to fracture when physical evidence refuses to behave. In early 2026, structural reinforcement work began at the ruins of the Hawthorne Municipal Pumping Station near Birmingham, England. The facility had been abandoned since the 1920s and partially collapsed after decades of neglect. Official records described it as a conventional steam-powered water pumping site constructed in 1858. Nothing more. During stabilization of the lower levels, workers broke through a bricked-up access corridor that had been sealed for more than a century. Behind it was a chamber untouched since the Victorian era. What they found inside immediately challenged everything historians thought they knew. About 19th century power systems mounted along the stone walls were thick copper conductors fixed to ceramic insulators. Not telegraph wire, these cables were far heavier, designed to carry sustained electrical load. At regular intervals, glass-enclosed lamps were mounted in standardized sockets, positioned to illuminate the entire chamber evenly. On one wall stood a distribution panel with brass rotary switches, each labeled with engraved markings indicating separate circuits. This was not decorative. This was infrastructure. Initial skepticism was expected. Archaeologists assumed the system must have been installed decades later, perhaps during an undocumented modernization. But as analysis began, that explanation quickly fell apart. Metallurgical testing of the copper showed refining methods consistent with mid-19th century production. Organic insulation materials dated conclusively to the 1860s. The glass composition of the lamps matched Victorian manufacturing techniques. Not early 20th century mass production. Most unsettling was the power source. There were no steam-driven dynamos connected to the system. Instead, engineers identified a set of induction-based generators mechanically coupled to the station's original water-driven pumping mechanisms. The flowing water itself had been used to generate electricity quietly, continuously, without combustion. This wasn't experimental equipment. It was designed to run daily. The implications were immediate and disturbing. If this system truly dated to the 1860s or 1870s, it meant that functional electrical generation and distribution existed decades before it was supposed to. Not in a laboratory, not at a world fair, but in a working municipal facility, and Hawthorne was only the beginning. Physical evidence forces questions. But documents provide answers if you know where to look. Once the Hawthorne's discovery became public among academic circles, historians began re-examining archival material that had long been dismissed as irrelevant or ambiguous. What emerged was not a single smoking gun, but a pattern fragmented, consistent, and deeply uncomfortable. Maintenance logs from the Birmingham Municipal Archives included repeated references between 1861 and 1878 to electrical apparatus inspection, lamp servicing, and conductor replacement. For over a century, these entries had been interpreted as early telegraph-related notes or clerical errors. Now, paired with the physical system itself, they could no longer be ignored. Personal correspondence added human clarity. A letter dated May 1865 from civil engineer Thomas Elwood describes the electric illumination at Hawthorne, which greatly improves safety in night operations, as it produces no smoke and no flame. He offers no technical explanation, suggesting the system was familiar rather than novel. Factory workers living nearby referenced steady white light, visible through station windows at night. One diary entry from 1869 describes the building as brighter than any gaslit street. An odd statement for a supposedly steam-only facility, Financial records raised further red flags. Hawthorne Station purchased multiple tons of heavy gauge copper wire between 1860 and 1875, quantities far exceeding what any telegraph installation would require. Invoices list payments for electrical maintenance engineers. Years before the profession was formally recognized, then came the patents. British patent. Archives contain dozens of mid-19th century filings describing water-driven electrical generators, induction lighting systems, and current regulation devices. Most were never commercialized on a national scale. Many were filed by municipal engineers, not private inventors seeking fame. These patents exist. They were approved. They were ignored when researchers expanded their search beyond Birmingham. Similar anomalies appeared elsewhere. Early electrical. Wiring embedded in walls of renovated buildings in Manchester, Leeds, and Sheffield. Newspaper articles describing electrically lit workshops in the 1870s quietly. Without fanfare, the evidence suggested a reality far more complex than the textbook narrative. Electricity wasn't invented at a single moment. It evolved, quietly, locally, pragmatically implemented where it solved problems, abandoned where it didn't. So why didn't it survive? Asterisk, 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 the disappearance of these systems doesn't require secret societies or dramatic conspiracies. It requires something far more mundane: economics, standardization, and historical convenience. Mid-19th century electrical systems like Hawthorne's were decentralized. They relied on local resources: flowing water, skilled technicians, custom-built components. They worked, but they didn't scale easily. By the late 1800s, industrial power was consolidating. Coal-powered steam stations offered predictable output anywhere fuel could be transported. Emerging electrical corporations pushed centralized generation, standardized voltages, uniform equipment. Systems that didn't fit this model were quietly removed. Documentation followed. Corporate archives were preserved. Municipal experiments were forgotten. Personal diaries were never digitized. When facilities were renovated, older systems were dismantled without comment. History favored the technologies that won economically, not necessarily those that worked best. The result was a simplified narrative. Electricity arrived suddenly, invented by a few famous names, replacing darkness overnight. It's a cleaner story, and a misleading one. The Hawthorne discovery reminds us that technological progress is not linear. It branches, stalls, retreats, and sometimes vanishes entirely. Knowledge can exist, function, and still be lost. If a fully operational electrical system could disappear for over a century, sealed behind brick and forgotten by history, then our understanding of the past is far less complete than we assume. And that raises a final, unsettling question. What other technologies were built, used, and abandoned, not because they failed, but because history chose not to remember them?